तस्वीर आ रही है जी?
जी सर।
कहाँ जी? नजर नहीं आ रही
सर आपके टॉप में
वो। चले मैं ठीक है।
I'm going to mute all of you and speak and then open.
वॉल्यूम
All right. So good afternoon, everybody. Today we are hosting CSSPR's first webinar of its new series. Let me begin by introducing CSSPR. The Center for Security, Strategy and Policy Research is an autonomous policy research center which is housed in the School of Integrated Social Sciences at the University of Lahore. It aims at generating research on issues relating to contemporary security and strategic aspects that Pakistan's domestic security environment and its international relations with other countries of the world. The center conducts research, publishes, and holds conferences on a broad range of regional and international security, strategic, peace, and conflict issues. Today, we have an eminent panel to discuss the plight of the Kashmiris during the pandemic. The topic of our discussion today is Kashmir in the Age of Detention, what changes for the Kashmiris pre and post-pandemic. Our first panelist today is Sardar Masood Khan. So I'll begin by introducing all our panelists and then we'll give them floor to make their formal comments. Sardar Masood Khan is the 14th president of Azad Jammu and Kashmir, a career diplomat. Masood Khan has served as Pakistan's permanent representative in the United Nations missions in New York and Geneva. He was also Pakistan's chief negotiator in the Nuclear Security Summit from 2009 to 2014. While being Pakistan's ambassador to China, Masood Khan played a monumental role in fostering Sino-Pak bilateral relations, for which he was conferred the highest award by President Xi Jinping in 2015. Thank you for joining us today, sir. You have always been very supportive and encouraging of our endeavors at the University of Lahore, for which we are grateful. Our second panelist today is Dr. Malia Lodhi. Ambassador Dr. Malia Lodhi has served as Pakistan's permanent representative to the United Nations, ambassador to the United States, and High Commissioner to the United Kingdom. She has had a prolific career. Dr. Lodhi was a public policy scholar at Woodrow Wilson Center and a fellow at the Kennedy School at Harvard University. She was the founding editor of a premier English daily in Pakistan, The News International. She is a recipient of the coveted Hilal-e-Imtiyaz. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Lodhi. I've been trying to host you ever since you came back to Pakistan, and I got my lucky break today. Our third panelist today is Victoria Schofield. Victoria Schofield is a historian, biographer, and a commentator on international affairs with a focus on South Asia, having traveled widely in India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. She is acknowledged as one of the leading international experts on the disputed region of Jammu and Kashmir and has given lectures on the subject in India, Pakistan, US, Europe, and Australia. She's the author of two of the most widely read and authoritative books on the Kashmir conflict titled Kashmir in the Crossfire and Kashmir in Conflict, India, Pakistan, and the Unending War. I welcome you to the webinar, Victoria. I know it's a bit early morning for you. Hope you have enough of coffee and tea in you to survive this session. Our fourth and last panelist today is Mr. Wes Rauf. Wes Rauf is Chairman, Board of Governors, University of Lahore, and the Honorary Council of Uganda and Pakistan. He's a media mogul, runs Jahan Media Group. He's a graduate of the London Business School and a social entrepreneur with a career in strategic ops and plans in various sectors. His healthcare ventures in Uganda have provided medical relief to the people of Kampala while creating much needed goodwill and space contributing to promoting the soft image of Pakistan. When he finds time from his busy schedule, he teaches courses in finance, marketing, and philosophy. He's also a motivational speaker and a keen reader. Thank you for joining us today, sir. The format for today's webinar is simple. I'll begin by setting the context for our discussion. I will then invite our speakers to make formal remarks for 10 minutes or more, followed by a moderated Q&A. Our session is going live on YouTube, and we have a lot of attendees here today listening and logged into Zoom. A word to the attendees, kindly post your questions in the Q&A and chat segment. Say your name if you wish to, your location, and please identify the speaker you wish to answer your question. The session is scheduled for 2 hours, but we have the flexibility of going overboard if needed. So I'll begin with some of the remarks that I had for this session to set the context. So Socrates is famous for his statement, "The unexamined life is not worth living." The statement is an important one. We want to know what's valuable, what's important, what is the right thing to do in our lives. And these tools of reflection and self-awareness that we have are supportive when everything around us is shifting. The coronavirus pandemic, with its day 51 of quarantine and self-isolation today in Pakistan, has allowed us to examine our lives like we have never before. It has brought forth fundamental political, ethical, and existential questions that we all are searching answers for. Let me talk a bit about society and then make a segue to the international system. COVID-19 crisis has exposed social justice tensions in our societies and structural vulnerabilities. The coronavirus has shown us that the inequalities we have tolerated in a society cannot be hidden behind virtue. That there are people out there who will be exposed to the virus for their want to satisfy hunger is stronger than their want to distance socially, donning a mask. So isolation, as we have seen, may be a marker of privilege. COVID-19 has affected prime ministers and paupers the same and does not care about your status, religion, race, or gender. So now move on to the international system. The language around coronavirus that we see increasingly taking root as days fall in line is that we are all in this together. But to me, this is another example of language of virtue hiding the truth of injustice. I say this because we are not in this together the same way. And this leads me to today's topic of discussion. What changes for the Kashmiris pre and post-pandemic? While the world suffers from voluntary detention, voluntary social distancing, voluntary self-isolation, there is nothing voluntary about the suffering of the Kashmiris, their detention, their isolation, their social distancing from the rest of the world. While the world thinks about freedom and may have found newfound meaning and respect for it, Kashmiris have been in the want of that freedom for decades, and I want you to think about that. So these are some of the thoughts I want you to engage with today while you make your formal comments. I will be posing a question each to all of you. In addition to your formal comments, you can decide to engage with that question. The order in which I'll be inviting you is that the President AJK will go first, followed by Dr. Lodi, Ms. Victoria, and then Mr. Wes. Once formal comments are made by all 4 panelists, each of you will have time to comment on each other's points if you wish to. I'll keep you muted, and only the speaker who will be making formal comments will be unmuted to speak. My question to you, Mr. President, is this which you can address after making your formal comments. We have seen that an increase in the intensity of COVID-19 has been equally matched by an increase in that of cross-LOC skirmishes and atrocities of the Indian security forces. The Handwara incident is just one case in point. Where do you see this headed? Is COVID-19 the cover that BJP RSS needs to fulfill its Kashmir agenda in full swing? You may now unmute your mic to make your formal statement, and welcome again. So can you unmute at your end, please?
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. So I start again. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Good afternoon and good morning, everybody. First of all, I wish you all health and safety. Let's hope and pray that soon we will be able to get rid of the coronavirus that has brought our global system to a standstill. Second, I am really grateful to Dr. Rabia Akhtar for organizing this timely webinar on Kashmir. You are a mover and shaker in the political and strategic fields, and we all respect you for that. My tribute also to Mr. Owais Rauf, Chairman, Board of Governors, University of Lahore, for his outstanding leadership of this institution with great vision and drive. I will begin with my own 6-point agenda on Jammu and Kashmir that I have been pursuing since 2016. 1, forge unity in your ranks. Don't speak in different conflicting voices. That's cacophony, not policy. 2, go back to the international community and multilateral forums, including the United Nations, international financial institutions, parliaments, custodians of international humanitarian law, and global civil society. The sporadic bilateral processes with India have proved to be illusory and counterproductive. 3, leverage the strength of the 10 million strong diaspora community, which has turned Kashmir into a genuine international movement. 4, use all tools of communication, the traditional media, social media, research journals, think tanks, and universities to disseminate the true narrative of Kashmir. 5, make Pakistan and Azad Kashmir strong economically, militarily, and strategically. You cannot win freedom for Kashmir ever if Pakistan is weak or is perceived to be weak. And finally, interface with the enlightened Indian political forces and members of civil society who speak up for the rights of the Kashmiris and have been advocating their right to self-determination. They should be your potential allies. Now I turn to the changes before and after the coronavirus pandemic. Before COVID-19 lockdown, Kashmir was under siege and under occupation. Today, Kashmir completes 9 months of that siege. You would recall that shortly after the August 5 invasion of Kashmir by India's 900,000 troops, thousands of young boys and children as young as 10, 11, and 12 were abducted and interned in concentration camps, which Indian CDS Bipin Rawat euphemistically called de-radicalization camps. An Indian NGO established the number of these boys was more than 13,000. That's not all. Thousands of our Hurriyat leaders and political activists all are under detention. A reign of intimidation, torture, killings, blindings, disappearances, and terrorism was unleashed on caged Kashmiris. Kashmiri women were objectified and were projected as spoils of war. India calls this normalcy. Well, normalcy of a graveyard, I would say. But these actions were and are genocide, ethnic cleansing, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. During that period, fortuitously, there was a groundswell of support for Kashmiris and a palpable opprobrium against the BJP and the RSS. The mainstream international media, the European Parliament, the British Parliament, US congressional committees, all called out India for its heinous crimes and horrifying practices. Even the Security Council held informal sessions on Kashmir after 5 decades. Despite this uproar, the irony was that the most powerful nations were tight-lipped about these horrors, hamstrung by their economic and strategic ties with India. But even before COVID-19, the attention on Kashmir was vaporizing because of Brexit, President Trump's impeachment inquiries, and other developments. COVID-19 brought the second lockdown for Kashmiris. So Kashmiris are under a twin lockdown, the first more lethal than the second one. The fascist BJP RSS regime decided to use this opportunity to the hilt. They hunt down young boys and kill them in staged encounters. Posthumously, they dub them as militants supported by Pakistan. They do not release their bodies to their families for fear of large funerals and instead inter them in unmarked graves. But the most vicious step they took was to introduce the so-called new domicile rules that would open the floodgates for import of Hindus from all over India to settle in Kashmir. Kashmiris' special rights to permanent residence, acquisition of property, education and employment, all are gone. This is an evil plan to grab Kashmiris' land, property, farmland, forests, livelihoods, and businesses. They would be homeless in their own homeland. They would be aliens in their own state. It is truly a scorched earth policy. This is the beginning of the saffronization of Jammu and Kashmir, where Muslims would be reduced to a minority. Only the Organization of Islamic Cooperation has condemned these rules, which are identical with Hitler's Nuremberg laws that paved the way for the Holocaust. Now it is the Kashmiris' turn to face a genocide and a pogrom. No other forum has taken cognizance of these crimes. India deliberately escalates hostile fire with heavy weaponry across the line of control to divert attention from its atrocities in the occupied Kashmir. This year, so far, it has violated ceasefire more than 850 times, causing fatalities and destruction. Its purpose is to signal to the world that the turbulence in Kashmir is not about Kashmiris' resistance or their future or their destiny, but about a potential nuclear escalation between India and Pakistan. Our armed forces have given a fitting reply and response to the trigger-happy Indian soldiers by targeting their military posts. What is the way forward? Some Kashmiris have hunkered down for survival. There's also civil disobedience. And there's also fierce resistance underway even as we speak. Neither India's coercion nor its blandishments are working in the occupied territory. While Kashmiris are literally under lock and key, we in Azad Kashmir in Pakistan are free to speak, free to reach out to opinion leaders and decision makers. The media, parliaments, and human rights organizations are amenable to our narrative. Let's use that space. Let's regain their attention. The challenges that COVID-19 has eclipsed the Kashmir story, and India wants to use this opportunity to remove Kashmir from the global agenda. We would not let that happen. Most importantly, Kashmir should not disappear from our own national radar screen. We would not let that happen too. Kashmir has now become part of the great game, the game of clash of religions and civilizations. Kashmir and Indian Muslims, in the BJP RSS mindset, are synonymous with treason and terrorism. So it is going to be a long haul, and the fault lines of this clash are immensely incendiary. I have been proposing initiation of a boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement against India. Why should corporate leaders and entrepreneurs invest in a fascist regime? We are launching a hashtag, Virtual Kashmir Diplomacy. Please own it, use it, and propagate it. The Arab street and governments have recently woken up to the ugly reality in India. They have warned India and Indians to discard anti-Islamism. Otherwise, there would be dire consequences. It is our historic responsibility too to upend the Hindutva juggernaut. I would also appeal to Ms. Victoria Schofield to convey to the Labour Party leader, Honorable Keir Starmer, that Kashmir is a cross-party issue supported by the entire political spectrum of the United Kingdom. Conservatives, Labour, Lib Dems, and SNP. Revisionism under the pressure of Indian lobby will neither be prudent nor advisable. Post-corona, the world will be volatile. I can see that powerful nations will be pitted against one another. There would be a sharp rise in ethnic and religious nationalism and Islamophobia, trade wars, and stiff competition on new technologies, artificial intelligence, blockchain, cognitive cloud computing, Internet of Things, and cryptocurrency would change the economic and political landscapes. Survival of the fittest and the richest will be the new order. The IFIs, the international financial institutions, will take center stage and the United Nations a backseat. In this milieu, the space for Kashmir will shrink unless we demonstrate leadership. Challenges lie ahead, and they are phenomenal. But we will not dither nor back off. Silence in these circumstances is dereliction of duty. We will continue our struggle by all means, including through virtual reality. Let me assure you that the people of Jammu and Kashmir will not capitulate and that they would continue their freedom struggle until they attain their right to self-determination and liberty. Kashmiris are in shackles, but their hearts and minds and souls are free. I thank you. And I think that I have already responded to the question in my remarks. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, for a comprehensive overview and the candidness with which you have approached the subject. I will now like to invite Dr. Lodi. And before you begin, Dr. Lodi, I would pose a question to you, which you can choose to engage with after you've made your formal remarks. So you've been a strong advocate of multilateralism for decades. Has COVID-19, in your opinion, amplified the role of multilateralism in South Asia? And if yes, how can Pakistan lobby for and convince the global fora to play an increased role in mitigating the conflict in Kashmir? I will now, let you unmute you and let you make your formal remarks.
You can hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Again, let me also begin by thanking Rabia for this initiative. I think, as the president of AJK said, you are a true trailblazer, and kudos to you for taking this initiative and bringing us into the tech age. I think we all need to be tech savvy, especially as we practice social isolation. So let me at the outset, Rabia, before I address your question, make 4 broad points. I think the title of this webinar, which is Kashmir in the Age of Detention, raises the question of how long it has been under occupation, under repression and oppression. It didn't, of course, enter this age of detention when this pandemic struck. It has been in a state of armed lockdown and occupation for the past 72 years plus. Thus, the long night of suffering of the people of occupied Kashmir has lasted for over 7 decades. But it is also the case, as you rightly point out in the title of this webinar, that their agony at the hands of brute force has intensified after the outbreak of the virus. And many questions, of course, arise, and I hope we will take these up in the question answer and in the discussion about what happens once this pandemic is over, or if it's a prolonged pandemic, what happens? The second point I want to make has been made by the previous speaker also, but it needs to be reinforced. The pandemic, of course, has given the Indian government a cover, an excuse, a pretext to intensify the repression and take even more draconian steps at a time when the world is preoccupied by fighting COVID-19 and countries are clearly focused on themselves, inwards rather than outwards, and human rights organizations too are consumed elsewhere. I mean, we see human rights organizations are very active 9 months ago, or even 6 months ago, but now they're focused elsewhere. I think we need to also recall the toxic environment created in India by this BJP government, where Muslim bashing is going on and the virus is being used as their latest pretext in a communal campaign that is aimed and directed primarily at Muslims and at other minorities too. So in occupied Kashmir, the intensification of repression has seen critical medical supplies being denied, of journalists being arrested or charged on frivolous grounds in a more comprehensive effort to silence all voices. And of course, the most egregious violations of human rights continues. This means that leaders continue in detention. The communication blackout also continues. Night raids take place, incommunicado detentions continue, widespread torture is reported, and all this under the cover of darkness imposed since last August, but exacerbated by the pandemic. The third point, broad point, is that Kashmiris, it's obvious, they live in a state of multiple deprivations. The prolonged occupation that has taken away their fundamental liberties and prevented them from exercising their fundamental right to self-determination. And then the brutality of the Modi-led BJP government that illegally annexed the state last August. And now the unspeakable cruelty of facing a health emergency with the hands tied and their lips sealed. I think each one of us can now directly feel some of the pain of a lockdown that the Kashmiris have endured since the past 9 months as we practice social isolation. I mean, ours is voluntary, theirs is enforced. But I think in a way we feel their pain in a completely different way. The fourth point, again, it reinforces something that Rabia, you said at the outset, and of course it's there in your question. None of this takes away the responsibility of the international community to address this dire situation. And nor should Pakistan pause or relent on its diplomatic campaign. The Kashmiris look to us, and we cannot ever let them down. I might add that our policy has to go beyond just tweets or perfunctory statements by our authorities, but more on this in a minute. Let me, for your audience, which is, I'm sure, a very informed one and a very engaged and interested one, go back to last year, as that may recall, or throw light on the international dynamics that we may confront in the post-pandemic period. I was at the United Nations serving as Pakistan's ambassador when on August the 5th, India illegally annexed Jammu and Kashmir in violation of UN Security Council resolutions and international law. And as an example, let me just cite one provision of only one of the Security Council resolutions. Para 2 of Council Resolution 38 of 1948 states clearly that neither party can bring about any material change in the situation in Jammu and Kashmir. It's pretty obvious that there was a material change that India tried to bring about by its August 5 action. And with that, let me briefly share what went into ensuring the first meeting of the Security Council to discuss the Kashmir issue in over half a century. Remember, Rabia, the last one, which discussed exclusively Jammu and Kashmir, was in 1965. This meeting that we were trying to, arrange or organize or convene or, at our request, obviously we're not a member of the council. This was not easy, and it took a huge effort in New York, in Islamabad, and of course in different capitals of council members. India, as you can imagine, lobbied hard, and its diplomacy we saw again in all the capitals of council members and of course in New York as well. But India failed to stop the meeting. The meeting did take place on the 16th of August, as I said, the first exclusive one and the only one so far to discuss Kashmir in 53 years. I think, this reaffirmed the international nature of the dispute and nullified the Indian claim that Kashmir was an internal matter. Not that we ever accepted it, but at the international level, it was important to nullify this because the Indian narrative was based on this, that, the council should not discuss this. This is either bilateral or it's internal. So that helped to blow that position apart. And discussion in the meeting also reaffirmed that council resolutions on Jammu and Kashmir, which call for a plebiscite, are alive and remain central to the resolution of the dispute. I remember the Indian PR going around lobbying and saying that, these resolutions are so old, they're dead. And, in response, I would go and lobby and say, law has no expiry date. If it did, we would live in a jungle. But, the fact that it took over half a century for such a meeting to take place was, I think, instructive. And I think that's where I want to focus for a while so that we can then discuss what happens in the post-pandemic phase. The fact that this meeting took place, after such a long time, and there was nothing in between, was a reflection of big power dynamics and how some members of the Permanent Five have over the years stood in the way of implementation of UN Security Council resolutions. We had China leading the effort at, of course, our request, at Pakistan's request. The UK was in favor. The Russians, the Chinese were able to keep neutral, which is, of course, was very useful for us. But let us remember, France opposed the meeting. And France opposed the meeting because the Prime Minister of India was due in Paris to finalize a deal, a military hardware deal. So I won't go into that, but we know what motivates nations. The US did not oppose the convening of the meeting. And again, that was very, very critical for us. But many diplomats told me, it remains unsubstantiated, that the US egged France on behind the scenes. And again, as I say, I don't know whether this is true or not. But what is true is that both the United States and France opposed any Security Council statement whose draft was ready. This wasn't issued. The draft was negotiated, but because the opposition came from these two members of the P5, it was never issued. But the meeting went ahead. Huge setback for India and a triumph for the voice of the Kashmiri people, which was heard in the chamber of the world's highest diplomatic forum. But this, as I said before, underlines a harsh reality. The non-implementation of UN Security Council resolutions on Kashmir, there isn't one, but 11 of them. Their non-resolution has been a consequence of big power dynamics. Originally, Russia played the role of the prime protector of India's interests on Kashmir, but over time, and I won't name them, almost 3 of the 5 permanent members have acted that way at different times. So why I share this is not to make a lament, but this is meant as a call for action, for our diplomatic efforts to be intensified, for us to work much harder. We have to use existing multilateral institutions. They may be weak, they may be fragile, they may be imperfect, but that's all we have, and we must use them. Now, India's actions before and after the pandemic, as we all know, and so does your informed audience, has triggered multiple crises. We see a human rights crisis in the disputed territory, a humanitarian crisis, now a health crisis, and of course, a crisis in relations between Pakistan and India. As for relations with India, I think, my own sense, of course, is that it will continue. Relations will continue on a turbulent and tense course until Prime Minister Modi is in power. I don't see that changing. So our foreign policy challenge will be an imposing one. How do we deal with the situation, the dire situation created by Delhi in occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and keep occupied Kashmir on the agenda of the international community when other urgent issues dominate the global agenda? How do we press our Kashmir policy and preserve our principled stance and mobilize support from the international community when the issue, on the one hand, was internationalized in an unprecedented way, no doubt about it, in the wake of India's August 5 action? But now, when the focus of the global community is going to remain inwards for some time to come. So I think, to my mind, three very simple things are important, and I just put them on the table. These are not the only, it's not an exhaustive list, but just to trigger the discussion, and I will close with these. First of all, what can Pakistan do? I think the first thing we need to do is evolve clarity in our own Kashmir policy, and above all, in the objectives that we seek. Some are near-term objectives, some are longer-term objectives. What are these? I will not amplify this further, but raise it as a question. Second, we need consistency in our diplomatic campaign on Kashmir, not an on-off approach in the post-pandemic world. And we do need to make the noise that we make at home with real efforts overseas. Preaching to the choir is all very well. I think we need to do that from time to time, preaching to the converted, because we need to keep opinion mobilized in our own domestic base. But this has to be matched by as much effort overseas. And we will need to keep pushing the boundaries at the international level. So I think in the post-pandemic phase, perhaps even earlier, two diplomatic steps that were urgent even before the pandemic struck, I think remain for Islamabad to consider. Otherwise, the danger is, as the president of AJK also said, Kashmir could fade from the international focus when the spotlight is elsewhere. So we should call for a ministerial meeting of the OIC on Jammu and Kashmir. This was never done. Should have been done. Still can be done. If we can meet virtually, all of us, so can they. And they should be made aware of also the anti-Muslim bashing. I think what we're seeing are at least tweets from several members of, let's say influential members of the Arab community, which is a first to my mind. I've never seen that before. So let's leverage that and see if whether we can call a meeting of this kind, even a virtual meeting, to discuss this. And of course, we need to call a special session of the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva exclusively on Indian occupied Kashmir. I fail to understand why this was not done before. But again, whenever this becomes possible, I think we need to do that. Finally, we need to, of course, mobilize and sustain a national consensus on our Kashmir policy. And that means that we need to reach out to all political forces. That requires cross-party involvement and inclusion. All must be involved and engaged to sustain. A national consensus means national. It doesn't mean a party consensus. So let me conclude by saying that the night of oppression is long for the people of Kashmir, but might has never been right in history. It lasts for decades, but finally it gives way. So, I'm totally convinced that the dawn of freedom from occupation for the Kashmiri people will come. But in the meantime, we, Pakistanis, individually, collectively, those in the government, those outside the government, must endeavor to do whatever we can to ensure that the issue of Kashmir is never forgotten. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lodi. It's always such a pleasure to listen to your insights. You're spot on what Pakistan needs to do and all that is not being done right now. It needs to happen. With this, I'm sure our viewers have noted down your points and there will be a lot of questions coming your way. With this, I will move on to our third speaker, Ms. Victoria. You have long, I'll pose a question to you and then I'll give you the floor and you can make your comments. So you have, you're no stranger to South Asia. We all are huge fans of your writings. You have long argued that maximalism from India and Pakistan has left little room for progress on the resolution of the Kashmir issue. So could COVID-19 that has hit both countries equally hard contribute toward further hardening of positions on matters related to their disputes? Or in your opinion, could it change the way both look at their rivalry in general and Kashmir in particular? Please unmute your mic to speak. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rabia. Assalamu alaikum, and greetings from London to you all, from a sunny day in London, where we are also in lockdown. I'm also delighted to be sharing the panel with the President, Masood Khan, and with Dr. Maliha Lodi, a friend from many years. And Awais, we don't know each other, but very nice to be sharing the panel with you. And thank you, Rabia and CSSPR, for making this possible. I think it's very important, even though we are in our own forms of lockdown, that we do continue with the issues which are close to our heart. And I think particularly in relation to Jammu and Kashmir, I want to make a few points, but what we're finding is that history sometimes does work in extraordinary ways. And having just had the, as one would say, internationalization of the issue after August 5th, who could have predicted that we would have this effectively double lockdown for Jammu and Kashmir? Not only have they had the long lockdown after August 5th, but suddenly when spring is coming and you would have thought situation could alter, we've got this worldwide lockdown, which we don't know how long it's going to go on. We don't understand exactly what's going to happen for all our countries. And as all panelists have said to date, you're right. The fact that we've got lockdown means that the issue is really off our agenda at the moment. We're worried about our own future. People are worried about their own lives, moving about, the elderly, the young, the people having babies, etc. And I think it's very unfortunate for Jammu and Kashmir that just at this point in time, we've suddenly got the worldwide coronavirus. But that's history for you. That's what happens with world events. And so we have to deal with it in the way we most possibly can. And best possibly can. And I think having a webinar like this is very important because it reminds us we still can communicate across boundaries and across borders. How fortunate we are that we do have this technology. That's another point to make, that we have a technology which 50 years ago, if we'd had a coronavirus epidemic, we couldn't possibly have had. Now, the points I want to make in relation to Jammu and Kashmir, it's well known that I have been following the issue for decades. And I think the fact that really is uppermost in our minds is the human rights situation. We can talk about the political situation, but what we really worry about is the human rights situation, which has been made worse by the current lockdown, the double lockdown, as it were. And I've had messages from my friends in the Valley of Kashmir who are describing exactly the situation that we wouldn't want to hear, the difficulty of getting information, because to date, they still don't have 4G internet, they have 2G internet. There was recently a question of a doctor when the first outbreak of coronavirus took place was identified on March 18th, immediately wrote to a doctor in Kent asking for advice, but was unable to download the documents he sent back. I mean, this is just a basic way of wanting to operate that should be allowed. So I think there's no doubt that what's happening there is enabling even more stringent control of the situation than would have happened otherwise. There possibly could have been more alleviation. As we know, there was a certain amount of alleviation. The situation is slightly improved by the fact that the internet has been restored partially. So no one would deny that the human rights should be foremost in our discussions. But the second point I want to make, which I think sometimes does get lost in the debate, is how are you going to work towards resolution of the issue? Because in all the decades that I've been following it, without resolution, you're going to continue to have human rights abuses, whether it's because of coronavirus, whether it's whatever is going on, whether it's firing across the line of control. And so the challenge for India and Pakistan is, how are you going to have a resolution of this dispute, which has been going on since 1947 in variations? As a historian, one thing I think is important is for everybody to understand the history, because maybe from understanding the history, there might be something that we can learn from. And in relation to this, when we're talking about dialogue, and it's a subject that comes up every so often with India and Pakistan. We've had the 62, 63 talks. We had the talks that were in 1998, 99, and then there was the 2004, 2005. What has gone wrong with these talks that they cannot be taken to finding some equitable resolution? And I would say that clearly bilateralism has failed. And there's one point that I would like to make that sometimes does get lost in the discussion, is that it's normally assumed that bilateralism was introduced in the 1972 Shimla Agreement. But if you examine the clauses of that agreement, it never said that it doesn't mean we're not going to use international assistance. And here I would say, why not take a leaf out of the UK's book when we were in a dire situation with Northern Ireland? We weren't so proud that we didn't call in the United States to help diffuse the situation. And so I think there should be no shame in thinking that there can be an international mediator, facilitator, whoever can actually break the logjam. Because I think it's been very clear, again, if you examine the history of these talks, actually the 62, 63 talks were with international mediation. That it would be a wonderful achievement for humanity for the 21st century if through an international mediator there could be a breakthrough in terms of resolving the issue, because it's not just resolving human rights abuses, it's resolving the issue of Jammu and Kashmir, which, as we all know, dates, why is there a line of control? Why is there a ceasefire line? It dates from the events of 1947 onwards. And I think, as I say, I've been to many conferences where we do talk about and we condemn human rights abuses, but one has to focus on what could be an equitable resolution of the dispute. And I think if I'm talking about international community, one has to aim high. Dr. Lodi is absolutely right. One has to utilize the UN, the European Union, the Commonwealth, which rarely gets a mention, but both India and Pakistan are members of the Commonwealth. The Organization of Islamic Countries as well, and aim high, aim to the Secretary General of the United Nations so that it doesn't drop down the agenda. Because as we all know, as citizens of the world, there's always a jockeying for power of what issue is most important, what will reach the headlines. And I think one of the ironies of the events of August 5th last year was that they did more to internationalize the issue and bring it to attention than any other action to date. I myself went to Washington for a Congress briefing. It was the first time that Congress had discussed the issue. And so it can happen. And I think that we mustn't lose hope, because again, I think I would also like to agree, might is never right. And people living on this planet deserve better. And we must learn also from our mistakes. Now, Rabia, in answer to your question, unfortunately, I think we had the 2005 earthquake. If again, we go back in history and we think how much the expectation was that, there was help coming. It was a terrible thing in 2005. And people were saying, if you go back on the commentary, they were saying, well, after all, perhaps this might break the logjam. This might make people realize, when so many lives are lost on both sides, that India and Pakistan will get together. I would like to think that the coronavirus epidemic would enable India and Pakistan to get together with representatives from the state to resolve this issue. But I'm afraid one has to be a bit pessimistic. And I think it's quite likely that attitudes actually will harden, particularly as people are looking after their own, so to speak, and are less interested in what's going on elsewhere. But again, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't lose hope. We need to keep writing about it. And as a foreigner, so to speak, to the dispute, I would say that it's important to lobby people like myself and indeed other governments, so that we remain informed. I was meant to be going to India and back to the Valley of Kashmir in April, but that visit had to be cancelled, not because I didn't get a visa, I hasten to add, but because of the coronavirus epidemic. And it's through travel and interviewing and being in touch with people that one understands the true ground realities. And I think that's also very important. So with those words, because I think the questions are coming in very fast, I will conclude because we've also got to hear from Owais. And again, thank you very much for making me part of this panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Victoria, for your enlightening perspective. And it's so good to hear from a foreigner that there is, or there should be hope, because people in South Asia who live with each other in India and Pakistan, there's not much hope to be seen. So it's really refreshing to hear your perspective on it. With this, we'll move to our fourth and final panelist, Mr. Westrove. You've heard all the previous three speakers make their remarks, so it's a good position to come in as the final panelist. My question to you is that you have studied, examined, and engaged closely with the Kashmir issue. Here at the University of Lahore, you are the patron of the first Kashmiri-led student association. Tell us, what could a young Kashmiri boy or girl caged helpless at the mercy of a brutal occupier be thinking today? Who and what could be the beacon of hope for them? What role do you envision for Pakistan to play in providing that hope for the Kashmiris? So I give the mic to you and you can unmute and make your formal remarks.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Abid. It's an honor that I am part of such an esteemed panel today, especially President Azad Jammu and Kashmir, and then obviously Dr. Malia Lodi and Victoria as well. It's an honor for us at University of Lahore to have such an esteemed panel with us. I would like to congratulate Dr. Abia. I was told today you have completed 5 years of this center at the University of Lahore. It obviously has been an experience working with you. Yes, we at University of Lahore established last year a student body for Kashmiri students. There were students from both sides of the border. We have many students from Azad Jammu and Kashmir as well. So we were able to experience what they and their families went through 9 months ago when this lockdown started. But obviously that never came to us in the same manner. But when this lockdown for Corona started all over the world, I realized how difficult it must be for Kashmiris to survive under occupation, under lockdown, when you have a soldier standing outside each and every household, how difficult life becomes. But today I'm going to not talk about the Kashmir issue only on the basis of its legal and other aspects. My panelists are obviously far superior in terms of understanding on those aspects, but I would like to talk about the human element. And especially, I believe how youth, the next generations, must have been affected by this brutal lockdown. 2 months ago, all universities and schools in Pakistan and obviously all over the world were closed down. Students were told to go and study from their homes. We have started to receive for the last 1 or 2 weeks feedback from our students who are now getting depressed sitting at home. And that's when you offered me to join this session today. I thought I would like to talk about the life of youth in occupied Kashmir under a lockdown, and what will happen to those generations going into the future. Will they have more hatred built into their hearts for the occupier? Will they lose hope from the entire world community coming in to support them and getting them out of this situation? How will they fare for the future, for their lives, for their families? So this is what I was wondering while preparing for today's session. And I would like to raise this issue beyond being a Pakistani, that if you keep people under such a situation for a very long time, you can never expect them to become loyal to you or like you or be on your side. I don't know whether Pakistan can support them in a manner that we can get them out of this lockdown soon. But if this carries on, the psychological impact on the young boys and girls in the occupied Kashmir will have a very long-term impact. Will they be in love with us on this side of the border? I'm not sure. Uh, do they believe that we can get some relief for them? Maybe President AJK is obviously best to answer that. But as a professor and a teacher myself, I really feel for them. And I think that is an element that we also need to highlight to the world community, to all our friends, to people like Victoria, who sitting in London can probably take this voice over. So this is what and I called it like living under not only a state lockdown, state repression, but also obviously because of a Corona lockdown, this is a double situation. I was going through some of the statistics of health infrastructure in the Indian occupied Kashmir, and it is ridiculous. Since we're running a hospital, Corona requires such a massive input of equipment and staff and protective gear to manage and to protect even healthcare professionals. And having less than 100 ventilators in occupied Kashmir for a population of close to 8 million people is just unimaginable. Nothing that we can do about it, but probably if we all start talking about it, like the governments have been mobilized, even in developed countries, they felt as if they were short of equipment and support. Maybe the Indian government decides to start providing people in occupied Kashmir with what is needed in terms of staff and equipment, ventilators, and other protective gear. So I think the impact goes across lives from young to old. I'm imagining everybody who is now infected with COVID-19 in occupied Kashmir. How do they get to hospitals? How do they get to the right facilities? Who treats them? Do they receive any support from the state or not? Because the state probably looks at them in a very negative manner. We know that there's a Muslim bashing going on in the entire India. Already Kashmiris are seen very negatively by the state and then by most of the right-wing RSS and others. So they've been treated like criminals already, and now they're infected with COVID-19. How are they looked upon? So these are the things that I was thinking about, and I was thinking this impact, and I see every day, even in our countries, which are living under lockdown because of COVID-19, that somebody with COVID infection is seen as a leper, somebody probably who would infect everyone else. Now you have a situation in Kashmir where they're already mistreated by the state. So how do they look at those people with the infection? So these are the things that I've been thinking about. And I felt that if there is nothing that somebody, a private individual like myself could do, at least I can start talking to people all across the world and make them realize and let Kashmir not be forgotten totally, because the crisis is global. Close to 60, 70,000 people have died in a country like US, which is one of the most advanced countries, a superpower. So God knows if this goes rampant in Kashmir. Pakistan and India both are under a lockdown because of COVID-19 now. Maybe this is an opportunity for the Indian people to realize what a lockdown means. And I'm sure there must be many saner minds on the other side of the border. Whether they can push this regime into easing the situation in occupied Kashmir, I don't know. Because the narrative is absolutely in control of the Modi regime, in India especially. So, but this is a moment in time when people should recognize the plight of Kashmiri people. At the end, I, as the chairman, Board of Governors, I thank all the participants for creating this opportunity for all of us to learn what plight is for the Kashmiris and what can we all do for them. Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Rao.
Thank you so much, sir. We deeply value your input and your insights. And I think as someone who is leading a university, it is important to have hope for the youth, not only of Pakistan, but also youth of Kashmir. And it's also important to talk about them. So as long as you being at the helm of affairs, dealing with young students, not lose hope, we can tie Victoria's positivity into it. And I think we have, some sort of, optimism about the whole situation in Kashmir. You rightly said that this is the time that we need to come together and go beyond rhetoric and see as to in our positions that whatever dispositions that we have, what can we offer at what level, help the government or in our individual capacities within Pakistan and outside Pakistan, what can we do to help the Kashmiris, live with the detention and coronavirus at the same time. With this, I would like to open the Q&A session. As you can see, as the panelists can see, there are a host of questions posed to all of you, and we are going to go through this list. Let me just scroll up, and in the meanwhile, while I read these questions and ask you to respond individually, I would want you to also go through the list and look at what questions posed to you so that you jot it down and lump together these questions in the interest of time, and we can then go through it. The first question that has been posed is by Khalid Banuri. And Khalid, I'm trying to actually go through the list of your question. Just give me a sec. Okay. So the question is for you, Mr. President, and I will then allow you to unmute your mic to answer the question. Khalid Banuri writes that confirmed conduct of crimes against humanity are clearly an illegal act as per the international law. What level of such crimes like genocide and torture, how many more lives lost would it take the international community to react decisively? So I'm unmuting you. Kindly, you can speak. Okay. Okay.
Well, thank you so much. We are compiling organizations in the Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir are quite active in this regard. And they report directly to the Human Rights Council's mechanisms, special rapporteurs, special representatives. They are also in communication with the United Nations. That's not a problem. We have evidence against India, and it is damning. And it's not just that the Kashmiris are compiling this evidence. The embassies, foreign embassies sitting in, Western embassies in particular, sitting in Delhi, are reporting directly to their capitals. But as it was pointed out by the speakers, that the most powerful nations on earth, the permanent five, they, because of realpolitik, are not responding or speaking to the situation. But that might change after the pandemic. And right now what we're doing is that we're counting our dead bodies in Kashmir, and we are compiling reports, and we are sending them to the international forums, but there is no reaction. There's no substantive reaction from there. So, but this doesn't mean that we should not persevere in our endeavor. Frankly speaking, if you look at the situation, you can't have a war. We should prepare for a war, because India has vowed that it would impose a war on Pakistan and Azad Kashmir. It has threatened recently that it wants to take over Gilgit-Baltistan. Earlier, it said that it would to take over Azad Jammu and Kashmir by force. So, and to give the devil his due, I would say that Indians do what they say. I mean, it might sound maniacal to you, but they did demolish the Babri Mosque. They did go ahead and repeal Article 370 and Article 35A. And so we should continue to use the space that is available to us. A war is not possible, but many channels have opened up, particularly the international media, parliaments, civil society organizations, human rights organizations, and media networks particularly. So we should use them. I think that Mr. Khalid Banouri's question is rhetorical. He knows the answer as well as I do. But I have, Dr. Rabia, I have some points that I want to share with you, and I'll wait for the opportune time, because when I was listening to these panelists, I had some thoughts to share with you, some very candid thoughts with you, and I'll try to answer the question why we have not been able to get the issue of Jammu and Kashmir resolved up to this day. What is the key reason? But that I'll wait for a signal from you.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. I'll give you the floor towards the end to do that. We will now move to the next two questions in the queue, one from Ali Jafri and the other from Dr. Kishore, posed to Dr. Lodi. And I will just try, ma'am, you can read the questions in the chat, but let me just paraphrase them. Ali's question is about Corona hogging the limelight. So what can we do to bring the limelight to the Kashmiris? And Dr. Kishore's question is about social media and restricted spaces and censorship with reference to Burhan Wani, and you can't post photographs, Facebook shuts it down, Twitter shuts it down. How can then, what could be an effective mode then? I would allow you to please unmute yourself and answer these two questions, and then we move down the list. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabia. I've been enjoying some of the questions that have been posed, and I've been reading through them in your chat box. But very briefly, because I want this to be a discussion rather than, statements by all the panelists. It's going to be tough. I'll say that at the outset, it's going to be tough because the world is going through a phase where we don't know how long this pandemic is going to last. And in any case, and I wrote this very recently in a column I did for Dawn newspaper, I said, what we're looking at in the post-pandemic world is there's going to be a greater need for international cooperation. And yet what we have seen is the lack of global cooperation during the pandemic. Of course, it's natural that countries had to turn inwards to deal with their health emergency. So I think, this is a trend that we have seen from the pre-pandemic period, where multilateralism is being rejected by some of the big powers who are acting unilaterally. So I think, I don't want to go into detail about the global international environment. I mean, perhaps we can do a separate discussion on that at some point. But I do think that while the odds are going to be very imposing, it's going to be tough. But that doesn't mean that we don't improvise and think of new ways in which we can mount or sustain our diplomatic campaign. What we cannot afford to do is to pause on this diplomatic campaign. There are many ways and avenues that are available. And I think the question about the social media, although it wasn't directly about what I'm going to say, I mean, the use of social media tools to also advance Pakistan's diplomatic campaign. But ultimately, diplomatic campaigns are intergovernmental. You have to be able to convince enough countries and governments in the world so that they are able to weigh in and weigh in with the Indian government to ensure at least that they're able to be open to negotiations with Pakistan. As you know, the Modi government has said Kashmir is non-negotiable. This is a complete departure from the past. So, I mean, the Modi government has really changed or tried to change the rules of the game radically. So Pakistan's challenge is, that we have to stand firm. Look, our position is based on law and on morality and on principle. I think that should give us the strength to keep pressing the point. And yes, as Victoria said, there's a human rights dimension to it, but that's not all there is to it. But of course, on human rights, countries are responsive. There are many countries in Europe. I mean, Europe has been the standard bearer, frankly, for human rights. So I think we need to look at the Nordic countries. We need to look at the EU countries. There are many ways in which we can keep going on and pressing, the point about we can't let it fade. I think that's the bottom line. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Lodhi. We'll move down the list, and Victoria, I would want you to answer this next question that is posed by Salman Elahi. In a world where proportionality or disproportionality of responses in any conflict are weighted to the nth degree, India's annexation of the princely states of Hyderabad and Junagadh through military force seldom gets attention in Pakistan's narrative. Why do you think that is so? Although it is not, it's a historical question. So I leave it to you. Which way do you want to answer this? You can unmute, please.
Right, yes. Thank you very much. For a lot of interesting questions are coming through. It's difficult to keep track of them. In terms of the historical question, I think the answer, really the quick answer to Hyderabad and Junagadh is that it's finished because there has not been a protest movement from the people. And this is where it's very important to listen to what the people want. Anyone who's read the history will understand what happened with Junagadh and Hyderabad. I won't go back over it, but it's when you have a representation from the people that you feel that you want to make some action. I think that's the way to answer that question. That's why Pakistan has not paid attention to that. Okay. All
right, thank you. I will now move to President AJK for a question from Lubna Sabir. She says that in the current situation, there is not enough attention, and as on the Kashmiris and by the international community, the world attention is diverted. So as a president, what can you do to ensure that they are not ignored? Over to you, sir.
Well, the president of Azad Jammu and Kashmir has some limitations, but within the framework that is available to me, I'm trying my best. As a matter of fact, we have shone the light on April the 2nd measures taken by India, because India took these measures in the dead of night, stealthily, and these are the most draconian measures that have been taken after August the 5th, because Kashmiris are being deprived of their land and their property, and also their seats in the educational institutions. So it's land grab, as a matter of fact. It's colonization of a territory. So your question is what we can do. And I would say that, I mean, you have some avenues available. You have some space available. Use it, because people lose heart. And Narendra Modi and RSS, they want to take advantage of this diversion of attention because of COVID-19. So we can use this time. I mean, this webinar hosted by Dr. Rabia Akhtar is a step in the right direction. I had similar webinars or video conferences with people in the United Kingdom and other parts of the world and inside Pakistan, so that we keep the issue alive and we keep it on the global agenda. And India's expectations to remove this issue, the issue of Jammu and Kashmir, from the global agenda should be shattered. There are voices being raised. Let me assure you that this Kashmir story had completely disappeared, as a matter of fact. And it was not just the international community's fault. You would recall that the European Parliament, some 650 MEPs had generated 6 resolutions, and they were criticizing, castigating India for its discriminatory policy against Muslims. And they also faulted India for not implementing UN Security Council resolutions. But those resolutions were shelved. So you have support there, a modicum of support in the parliamentary world, and you must utilize it. So we have to revive that support that we gained before COVID-19. There are many other channels. Let me tell you that we have neglected many areas. I mean, for instance, I can tell you that out of 200 primetime programs on Indian television, about 84 would be on Kashmir or Pakistan. But our attention is split. We are not paying the kind of attention that we should be to Kashmir. And you'd recall that in the month of October, there was this Azadi March, which in fact was the biggest factor responsible for diverting attention from Kashmir when the attention had reached its climax. So I think that there are some internal factors, also international dynamics, and we the Kashmiris and the people of Jammu and Kashmir and also the people of Pakistan should explore the space that is available to us, and we should use it. And I can tell you that multiple channels are available for communication, for outreach, for lobbying, even in these times. And I was pleased that in the recent past, the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Guardian, and many other UK and US papers have started writing on Kashmir again.
Sir, I would want you to stay online and take two more questions before I move to Dr. Lodi. One question is about why doesn't Pakistan pull out of Shimla agreement to take Kashmir back to 47? So your comment on that. And secondly, treatment of Kashmiris on our side of the line of control in Azad Jammu and Kashmir. There were some protests in September 2019, and one of the
Can you hear me?
Yes. So can you address these two questions, and I'll move down the list afterwards.
I missed the last part of your question because the first part is okay.
Okay,
it is
so
about the similar agreement, but what was the last part?
So the second question that's been posed by one of the attendees is about treatment of Kashmiris who try and protest against Pakistan or the administration, and their voices are
against Pakistan.
quelled. So what do you how would you comment on us demanding human rights from Indian counterparts but not providing the same?
I missed that bit.
Hello, can you guys hear me? I'm sorry,
Yes, no, I can hear you. I heard the first part of your question, and then you were moving to the second part, and then you were saying some people are asking why, and what was that?
So it was about the protest in September 2019 against the administration, against Pakistan, and this student is trying to refer to us asking for human rights from the Indians in the Indian occupied Kashmir, is worried about human rights situation in AJK. Would you like to comment on that?
Gladly, I would like to respond to both the questions. Let me tell you that the Simla agreement doesn't bilateralize the issue of Jammu and Kashmir. There are many clauses in the Simla agreement, which would, of course, allow you to refer the case to the United Nations Security Council. Second is that there is an article which is called Article 103 of the United Nations Charter. Now that article overrides all bilateral agreements. I mean, if there's no agreement between the two nations and they cannot resolve their issues, it is Article 103 that governs. And that is the Grun norm in the legal lingo. That would be the Grun norm. Why did India sign the similar agreement and later on propagated that it is a bilateral issue because they wanted to exclude the people of Jammu and Kashmir from the issue of Jammu and Kashmir, and they wanted to keep the United Nations at distance. They wanted to exclude the Kashmiris and the United Nations, and that's why they've been harping on the bilateral nature of the Kashmir dispute. Now, recently they have started saying that it is not a bilateral issue, it's in fact a unilateral issue, that anything that happens in the Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir is an internal issue. It's an issue which directly or indirectly impinges on their sovereignty. So, but let me tell you that about the Simla agreement, India has used Simla agreement or this process of bilateral negotiations to buy time, to delude Pakistan, because they wanted to consolidate the occupation of the territory. The second question is about, we talk about the human rights situation in the Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and we do not allow that kind of dissent in Azad Kashmir. This is not true. Let me tell you why. Because in the Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, you have killings, you have blindings, you have torture, you have enforced disappearances, you have fake encounters, women are raped and molested, and there are unmarked graves there. There are half widows. There are concertina wires throughout the occupied territory. Come to Azad Kashmir, and you would see none of that here. Let me tell you that we have been inviting British lawmakers, United States lawmakers, European lawmakers to showcase what we have here in Azad Kashmir. Now, let me tell you, they may have a point, because we are not a paragon of perfection here in Azad Kashmir. Of course, we have problems, but these problems would be similar to the kind of problems that you have in Pakistan or other developing countries. I mean, when we are trying to ensure promotion and protection of rights, it's a long process. There's a hidden question. Let me tell you, there's a hidden question, and let me address it up front if I have your permission.
Sure, sir.
And that is, they say that why don't we allow or why don't we let them talk about an independent Kashmir? Because they think that they have the right. Self-determination doesn't limit the choices. The right to self-determination does not limit the choices. You know, the United Nations Security Council resolutions gave only 2 options. And let me compare and contrast. JKLF, Jammu and Kashmir Liberation Front, is a pro-independence party. Their leader is in Tihar jail, in a death cell, and their party has been banned. Here in Azad Kashmir, we have a high degree of tolerance for pro-independence elements. The party is not banned, and their leader, Rafiq Dar, he can show up at bars, I mean legal bars, and he can go to the universities, and he can go to political rallies and address there. So I think that, and finally, I would say that there's this Article 257 of the Constitution of Pakistan, which adds caveats and qualifications. It says that first, the people of Jammu and Kashmir have to exercise their right to self-determination in accordance with the United Nations Security Council resolution, and then the relationship between the people of Jammu and Kashmir and Pakistan will be determined. We haven't said, like India, that Jammu and Kashmir is a union territory, that it is an integral part of the Indian Union. We haven't said that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. I'd move to Dr. Lodi, and I will just paraphrase. I want you to answer these 3 questions. First is the role of OIC that you have mentioned. The Arab countries lately, you know, they've been deporting Muslims from their territory. So do you think, are they ready to take on the Kashmir issue? Secondly, the release of Farooq Abdullah, what does that signal or signify? And thirdly, major stakeholders, they have competing interests. So how does one bring all of them on the table for the resolution of Kashmir? And next, I'll move to Victoria. Dr. Lodi, can you
Sorry,
unmute?
yeah. Yes. Sorry, I didn't unmute myself. I think the easy answer to the Farooq Abdullah question and a short answer to the Farooq Abdullah question is India is doing what it's always done for over 70 years, divide and rule. They've always tried to woo certain leaders, but these are not the true representatives of the Kashmiri people. And yet, the people or the Kashmiri leaders in occupied Kashmir and all former chief ministers who were allies of Delhi against the Kashmiri people, they were also put under detention. So, I mean, look at the fear factor. Look at Delhi's fear of all Kashmiris, that even their collaborators, they had to put under house arrest. And if they're now releasing one or two, frankly, that is meaningless, except in terms of a political strategy, which may well be Ajit Doval's political strategy, that somehow we again play this game of, as I said, divide and rule. As for the other question, I mean, it's a tough. The international environment is tough. It's challenging. I mean, how do you get people to support your point of view? You don't stop. It is a difficult situation. But as I said before, I mean, we have law and morality on our side. We have international law. We have Security Council resolutions on our side. So that should give us the comfort and the confidence to continue. But of course, it is big power politics. I never call them great powers. To be great, you have to qualify by your conduct, not by your size. So I've always said that big powers are the ones that have stood in the way. Some of them, not all of them. As I said before, China has been critical in helping us on Kashmir since last year. So I think, the question about the OIC, again, we know that the OIC is a divided house. It's a house divided against itself also. And yet we have to do whatever we can to leverage it. Let me say, because I know Masood Khan has also served in New York, the OIC is an important bloc at the United Nations and in several multilateral institutions. Many issues we work together. Many issues we divide. We don't have agreement. So I think the need to mobilize all diplomatic forums, the need to mobilize all blocs of which we are either members or should be members, it's a big task ahead. But I have no doubt that we can do it if we show the commitment. And I think, you haven't asked me this question, but Khalid Banouri had put this question. So very quickly, I just say, he talked about the involvement of civil society. He's absolutely right. I mean, diplomacy, I've always said diplomacy was never done by men in gray suits in closed rooms. And it's not that way these days at all. Public diplomacy is key. And now, at a time when the human rights dimension of occupied Kashmir is so extremely important to try to win hearts and minds, you can see the impact then of engagement with civil society organizations, using our own as well as leveraging those internationally. So I think, there has been a reluctance sometimes on the part of official Pakistan, should I say, to engage with some of these because they raise questions about, uncomfortable things. That's, part of the game. You can't sort of not engage with these organizations. Look, organizations like Amnesty, like Human Rights Watch, like the Committee for the Protection of Journalists, I think they've done a splendid job in terms of highlighting what was happening and is happening in occupied Jammu and Kashmir, especially in the wake of the August 5. So it's extremely important. I mean, governments alone cannot do it, but governments must learn to leverage and use civil society organizations, their own, as I said, as well as internationally, This is not a government to government job. You impact on governments through the biggest superpower of our time, and that is public opinion. That is the biggest superpower of our time and in our age. Public opinion, if you can leverage that in countries whose governments are not in favorable positions to, let's say, Kashmir, that's how you have to go. But then it requires a very multifaceted policy. And I think the foreign ministry needs to really re-equip itself and also find the skills that are needed in today's digital age and today's age of public diplomacy to do the job. So I'll end there. Sorry, it went on a little longer than I had planned.
No, it's okay. I will pose one question to Mr. Westrove, which comes before the questions posed to Victoria. So my question to Mr. Westrove is, let me just pull this up, just give me a sec. The role of academia in policy making, and as to how, as an academic, do you see we in the academia can make a difference? Pakistan earlier, never had this policy of engaging academics into policy making. But now the Foreign Advisory Affairs Advisory Committee has some academics in it. How can we channelize this to may develop a policy on Kashmir and India whole?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Abha. It's a good question. I think the best ways for academics to be involved into policy making is obviously always to build conversation, to bring about research. So I think bringing this conflict into the world of academics, especially in Pakistan, is not new. I see it's been around for long, but I think academicians have never been part of the policy making. But under the current establishment in Pakistan, I see they've set up a new team of academics who are contributing to the policy making at the state level. So we in the universities obviously can create the conversation. Similar to the webinar that we're having right now. In this way, then this gets into the public domain, gets into the domain of researchers and academicians, and slowly, gradually, I think good policies come up. So this way, universities in Pakistan can contribute to what the state is thinking, and especially for conflicts like these. I also want to talk a little about a little hope that I have is across the border as well. And I mentioned it before, that many academicians and intellectuals in India can also, especially since they're also going through a lockdown right now, they probably do realize how difficult it must be for ordinary Kashmiris to, for the last 9 months, to be living under a similar situation. And now they're facing a COVID-19 as well. I think for those academicians, they can raise their voice in India as well, and it matters. Like we know some of the Nobel laureates talked about problems with the economic policies of Indian government. They were barred, censored by the media, but whatever they said mattered a lot. So I think we sitting on this side should attempt to engage academicians and faculty and professors on the other side and try to put our point across. Now, I'm not just saying it because as we Pakistanis feel for Kashmir issue differently, but I think it's a humanitarian problem right now. And India and its intellectuals need to recognize that all of this will ultimately come back to haunt them one day, if not today, tomorrow. So I think we have a great role, and that is primarily to build the conversation, engage intellectual communities, academicians into that, and ultimately try to impact the state policy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I would now move to Victoria. So there are a couple of questions posed to you. I'll list 3 of them, in that order. There's one question about bioterrorism, especially in the wake of coronavirus and hybrid warfare threat. You've been, following this region as a South Asia specialist. What is your take on it? Do you think South Asia is ready for it? Firstly, do you think it's a conspiracy theory? Do you buy into conspiracy theories? Or, what is your take on it? And if the world is moving towards, bioterrorism and the threat related to it, do you think South Asia is equipped to deal with it? Secondly, Pakistan, the question is, do you think Pakistan is in a position to demand from the international community to pressure India to lift the curfew? Before it already is a humanitarian crisis, but do you think Pakistan has what it takes to demand from the international community? And the third question by Khalid Banouri is that he says, I'm struck by a very factual quip, bilateralism has clearly failed. India obviously hides behind it. You do support a multilateral approach. When do you think your hope can convert into a strategy realistically? So I'll end here for you. I take these three questions and we'll move to President AJK. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rabia, for those, and to the participants for the questions. I mean, firstly, on bioterrorism, I think whether South Asia is equipped, I don't think the world is equipped to deal with bioterrorism. And I would like to think that this, we've even heard that the whole COVID outbreak was part of China's sort of quotes terrorist activities, which I don't believe. But I think it would be incredibly serious if this is the way forward, using bioterrorism. And I would like to think not. I would like to really keep one's optimism that this is not bioterrorism. And so I don't buy into that conspiracy theory. But equally, if it were to be, or if countries were to start using that, it's against every convention there is. And I'm not sure the world is equipped to deal with it. So let's hope that that is not the case. Secondly, the Pakistan demanding pressurizing the international community. I think, as I've said, and Dr. Lodi has said, and the president has said in his presentations, one has to use all the tools we've got, and all the countries we've got, and all the organizations we've got. The organizations are only as good as the people who staff them effectively. And I think the problem that we face is that there are so many issues in the world to be dealt with, and unless one is vigilant and keeps on with an issue, it does drop from the agenda by force of nature. There's other things to be dealt with, and so what one has to maintain, and all the points that the president made of continuity and cohesion in terms of the narrative, and the other aspect that I think, and this picks up also from Dr. Lodi's point about civil society, why should one bother? Why should countries bother? Because it's too dangerous not to bother. And we have to look at the world we're living in, with the overpopulation, with the diminishing resources. One would be the happiest person in the world if you could resolve the dispute between India and Pakistan, because look how the population, civil society across the board, suffers because of this issue. The Kashmiris, the inhabitants of the state, suffer more, but actually you're all losing out, because you're losing out valuable resources which you need to educate your people, to alleviate the demographic situation, because of what's being spent on your respective armies. And I've said this in many fora. One can produce the statistics, but India and Pakistan should be natural allies. They should not be natural enemies. And over the decades, over 70 plus years, you've spent all this on building armies and building nuclear weapons and attaining nuclear capability. But actually, the fundamental thing is to resolve disputes, because you need your resources to really help your people. And that's where civil society comes in. If civil society understood the loss to their livelihood, to their lives, because of this ongoing dispute, you would get them up to stand and be counted. So it's basically, again, Dr. Lodi put it very well, it's the public opinion. It's the biggest superpower there is, to lever public opinion. And that's how you would manage. As I say, I think Pakistan, it's difficult because of the bilateral situation with Pakistan and India. That's why Pakistan must lobby the international community. And I know the international community is fickle. As I say, it's got other issues it deals with, but a consistent, coherent, national platform to lobby for international support is really the only way forward. And I'm sorry it's taken this long, and I'm sorry the situation has got so dire. Again, you know, as a historian, we can't deal in counterfactual history, but there are a lot of if-onlys. If only the 62-63 talks had succeeded, you would not have had the martyrs of the 65 war, or maybe not even the breakup of Pakistan. You know, there are a lot of if-onlys, or if only Musharraf's peace initiative had worked, if only the Lahore Declaration had worked in the late 1990s. So every time one puts it off, it almost gets worse. And bilateralism, I do believe, I've answered the question here on the chat line. I think one has to realize when one's defeated. And I think bilateralism has failed between India and Pakistan, because had it not failed, you would not still have this ongoing dispute. So I think there is no shame, as I say, in thinking maybe have a third party facilitator, mediator, then they can become the scapegoat, because inevitably there's going to have to be some compromise. Hardened positions never brought peace. And I think as I say, it's so imperative so that the people who are most affected, which are those 12+ million people living in the state of Jammu and Kashmir or in the valley, so that they can lead the sort of lives that we lead, where they do have free, I mean, not in the current situation, but they have freedom of movement, freedom of speech. A question came up on the chat line about attacks on journalists, because journalists in Kashmir are having a really difficult time at the moment. Congratulations to the Pulitzer Prize winners. But, you know, as I say, we live so much in a bubble that we enjoy our freedoms, that it's difficult to imagine what it's not like to have those freedoms. We've had a minor taste of it by this current lockdown, but look at the way we can still communicate and we can give vent to what we believe. So I think, as I say, it's only going to be kept alive by people commentating and pushing and harnessing that civil society. And I think I'm going to borrow that expression, Dr. Lodi, that superpower is public opinion, because I think that is what we have to use. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. I'll move to President AJK, and the question that's actually, there are a lot of comments, there's a lot of repetition as well, but the question that is posed to you and the audience wants to know is about the demographic changes in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and what are your comments about the Domicile Law, and what should Pakistan's response be in order to deal with this new thing that India has implemented towards rounding off its annexation of Jammu and Kashmir now?
These domicile rules are vicious. As a matter of fact, what they say is that anybody who's lived in the Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir for the past 15 years, I mean, anybody from India, Hindus in particular, or anybody who studied for 7 years in the IOJK, or has appeared in the 10th, 11th, or 12th class examinations, qualifies for permanent residence there and all the other attendant rights. Now, this is a formula to open the floodgates for settling ex-military personnel, their families, civil servants, also their families, children. Then there are hundreds of thousands of migrant workers from all over India. They are from Gujarat, and they are from Hyderabad. They are also from other parts, Maharashtra, Bihar, Bengal, Rajasthan, Delhi, Punjab. They are already there in the occupied territory, but they did not have these permanent rights. Now they will have those rights. In addition to that, they have these Hindu refugees. They're called West Pakistan refugees, and their number should be more than 300,000. So they want to accommodate them in the occupied territory. Now the net impact is that the demographic changes would be made. The Indian government has also mapped these temples dating back to the Mughal emperors, and they want to reconstruct those temples, 100,000 temples. They want to build hospital complexes, and they want to reserve vast tracts of land for RSS operatives and also for businesses and enterprises. So there would be a massive influx of Hindus from all over India, and Kashmir would no more remain Kashmir. I mean, Muslims would be either eliminated, displaced, or for them, immense stress would be created. What should we be doing? What should we be doing? I think that the Foreign Ministry has been communicating with the President of the Security Council and the United Nations General Assembly, also with the United Nations Secretary General. They have also been sending communications to the Human Rights Commission. And I think that what India has done is a clear violation of Article 49 of the 4th Geneva Convention, ICC statute, and several Security Council resolutions. So this is a violation of international law, Security Council resolutions, and international humanitarian law. Now, these communications should go there. We should liaise with the International Committee of the Red Cross, the Human Rights Council, the Security Council, the General Assembly, and create a momentum. As somebody said, speeches are not enough. You have to have a new architecture of diplomacy to influence public opinion. Now, if I have your permission, I would like to add a few points. You know, I'm grateful to you, Dr. Rabi Akhtar, because you invited the President of Azad Jammu and Kashmir, and you honor us because I represent this state. We have a flag, a constitution. We have a bicameral legislature, and this represents not just the people of Azad Kashmir, the territory that we liberated ourselves, our founding father liberated, but also the entire state. So this is the only legitimate state that exists today, of course, associated with Pakistan. The second thing that I want to highlight is that there's no magic wand for the resolution of the Jammu and Kashmir dispute. And it is a game of power and economic prowess. And unless Pakistan and Azad Kashmir, and Pakistan in particular, become strong, you cannot generate critical public opinion all over the world. From a position of weakness, you won't be able to do it. The second thing that I want to tell is that if you do not involve Kashmiris, how are you going to resolve the issue of Jammu and Kashmir? If they do not sit around the negotiating tables, let's talk about the bilateral negotiating tables. There was no Kashmiri representation there. There is no Kashmiri representation in the United Nations. Now, when the Good Friday Agreement was being signed, were the Irish excluded? Or when, for instance, I mean, the Taliban or the Afghan government or United States were negotiating, did they exclude the Taliban? Because you have to understand that one of the reasons that we have not been able to resolve the Jammu and Kashmir dispute is that we have not recognized Kashmiris as the primary stakeholders, because they're the ones who have to decide their future in accordance with the UN Security Council resolutions. The function of the governments of India and Pakistan was to create an enabling environment to facilitate the holding of a plebiscite, a referendum. So how is it possible that diplomats from both sides exchange démarches and they expect that the Kashmir issue would be resolved? This is one thing that I want to highlight. So my suggestion to everybody is that include Kashmiris, their representatives, in one form or the other. The second thing is that associate United Nations with all your efforts. You know, people are talking about mediation. President Trump talked about mediation on Kashmir. And of course, he did not pursue it very seriously. But did he mention Kashmiris? He mentioned Delhi and Islamabad, that there would be a mediation. So the Kashmiris were not mentioned. Kashmiris are not chattel. It's not a piece of land. It is 20 million people trying to determine their future. and they must be included in any mediatory process, in any diplomatic process. Now, the other thing that I want to say, that we here in Azad Kashmir in Pakistan, we are not preparing for the future. The BJP RSS's agenda is proactive. You know, they took a step on August the 5th, but they took two subsequent steps, one on October the 31st and the other on April the 2nd. Give a test to many of the people, your own students or faculty. They would not know what happened on October the 31st. Last year, October the 31st, they bifurcated the state of Jammu and Kashmir, the occupied part, into two parts, and they called them union territories. And they included Gilgit-Baltistan and Azad Kashmir as part of the Indian Union. And then they released maps showing Azad Kashmir and Gilgit-Pakistan as part of India. And they're saying that they're going to take these areas militarily. Now, and then on April the 2nd, these domicile laws. India has further agenda down the road, but we are reacting to what happened on August the 5th. Our approach is not proactive, it is reactive. The other thing that I want to tell you is that lots of people all around Pakistan and in the world, they need a crash course on Kashmir literacy. Victoria Schofield, I read her book, and she's an authority on the subject. She would bear testimony to the fact that lots of people who are these very passionate campaigners about Kashmir, they do not know much about Kashmir, its history. So I think that one thing that we are missing is the academic work. For God's sake, in the United States, I'm told there are 40 odd authors ready to write on Kashmir, but nobody is coordinating them. In the United Kingdom also, there are academics who want to write on Kashmir. But Indians over the years, over the decades, have been writing systematically on Kashmir. And they have been building their case. Let me also tell you that our best diplomacy today is speeches, counting dead bodies of the Kashmiris, and then compiling reports. And then we are happy. This is not a strategic approach towards the resolution of the Jammu and Kashmir dispute. Dr. Maliha Lodi talked about public opinion as superpower. You have to create that superpower. It doesn't happen of its volition. It doesn't descend on you. You have to craft it. You have to craft it. I do agree that from a position of weakness, you can use public opinion as a force multiplier. This has happened in the history. So few in the history have defeated so many. The people who used to be considered invincible, they were then completely defeated by a handful of people. Now, I think that we have one good opening. The Arab street has woken up, and right now they are expressing solidarity and empathy with the people of India, Muslims in India. But I think that we can also have an ingress. Now, the last point that I want to make is this, that here in Pakistan, since we are pursuing moral, diplomatic, and political campaign, some people say that this is not enough, that this is cowardice, that this is inaction. They do not understand the importance of the spoken and the written word and outreach to the diplomatic community. And we have to convince them. But at the same time, some people think that armed forces are not doing enough. This is not true. In the recent past, and I'm going back to your first question, I would say in the recent past, Our armed forces have valiantly given tough time to the Indian soldiers across the line of control. And in a tweet responding to Rajnath Singh and Amit Shah, I said, why are you commiserating? Why are you crying right now when your officers and your soldiers are being killed? They are in a foreign land. Pull them back, recall them, because this land doesn't belong to them. So I think that the armed forces of Pakistan are doing a marvelous job, and so are civil society organizations and media networks in Pakistan. Our problem really is that we are working in silos. And in every silo, you will see a center of excellence or an outstanding individual, but we do not have synergy. And I think that today, when you host this webinar, you create that synergy. And I congratulate you for that. I think that either Ms. Victoria Schofield deliberately skipped my suggestion or she forgot about it. But I would remind you that this new Labour leader, he's trying to change Labour's traditional position. I don't know whether Ms. Schofield, whether you're Labour or Conservative, please meet him. You're an authority. Tell him about the history of Jammu and Kashmir and tell him that by taking such a stance, he has hurt the sensibilities of 8 million Kashmiris. I'd say 13 million Kashmiris. And I think that revisionism of the Labour's established policy on Kashmir would have costs, and it is not prudent. One thing gratuitously that I want to, on bioterrorism, I want to say that right now the debate is not about bioterrorism, it is about use of bioweapon by a state probably. And there are 3 or 4 possibilities. One is, of course, bioweapon, which is released with full deniability. Second possibility is that a toxic pathogen can accidentally escape. Third is some lapse in biosafety and biosecurity. And finally, the last point is that some lone wolf or a bioterrorist can cause havoc, as it was caused way back in 2001, 2002, by sending these anthrax in envelopes. What I would say that this threat is very palpable, whether it is done for malign purposes or whether it was for benign purposes, but some accident happened. We have to prepare the world for a pandemic of this scale. And I would say, Alhamdulillah, in Azad Kashmir, we have no fatalities and everything is under control. So far, let's keep our fingers crossed. And last word is that we are headed towards a Hobbesian world. The world order that was crafted in the aftermath of the Second World War is collapsing. And I think that the primordial instincts are driving policy making and state-to-state relations. So the reason I raise it is that we will have to see what happens after the pandemic. Maybe the world is affected so radically that we would not be able to find a niche or space for Kashmir. And therefore, we have to think hard, how can we deal with this kind of a situation? And the last point is Kashmir is not about Kashmir, it is about Pakistan. It is about the completion of Pakistan. It is about the security of Pakistan. And I would say that Pakistan is incomplete. Pakistan is incomplete without Jammu and Kashmir, and Jammu and Kashmir has no identity without the state of Pakistan. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. President. I would, obviously, we have exceeded our time. And this would be a last round of questions. There are a lot of repetition in questions, so I will not be going through all of them. And I've seen some of them have already been answered. I'll just pose one question each to Mr. Vesrov, Victoria, and Dr. Lodi. And then we will end this webinar. To Mr. Vesrov, my question is, I want you to envision future, and I want you to tell us what do you see will happen if and when India lifts the curfew restrictions in Kashmir? How do you see the freedom movement growing, reacting to it? Just your quick take on it. It seems like a hypothetical right now, but one must exercise one's thought process to it. So please do tell us as to what do you think, what kind of a world do you envision?
Thank you, Dr. Abhay. I think I feel that protests will resume immediately the moment India takes away the lockdown, because people in Kashmir must be so incensed and so depressed and upset up into their livelihoods, their economic well-being. I think all of this will have an impact, the psychological impact, that you will see very violent protests. This is what I think. And probably that is why Indians have not been able to take away this lockdown for 9 months. So in my opinion, not a very good future for Kashmir immediately after the lockdown. I don't know how the Indian government intends to use force, brutal force, to put it down. It may become very violent, but not a very bright future, in my opinion, for some months to come. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Vesrov. I'll move to Victoria. You have seen the questions that have been posed to you, and I think you answered some of them too. I want you, for the audience, I want you to answer the question about third-party mediation. How realistic do you think it is a scenario for Kashmir? Because both India and Pakistan have kept Kashmir as a bilateral issue. And throughout the crisis that you've seen pre and post nuclearization, you've seen third party involvement in it, and both sides not happy with the third party involvement, taking, having to say that, whatever the third party is siding with the other. So just for our audience, why do you think that third party is a realistic option?
Thank you, Rabia, and thank you all panelists, and thank you so much for having me on this panel. Why do I think that? Well, I'd be more than happy if both India and Pakistan, with a representative selection of Kashmiris, of the inhabitants of the state, could resolve the issue. But the proof is in the pudding, and they haven't managed to do so yet. Certainly, I don't think that third-party mediator should have any vested interests. And I actually put on the chat line that maybe a country such as Norway, a country which is trusted by all, could possibly break the logjam. Because again, I emphasize that we can criticize, and rightly should criticize, the human rights abuses, but until there is a resolution of the issue, those human rights abuses are going to continue. And I think that's why you need to have a roadmap of what would be the resolution of the issue. And however it's achieved. So I would certainly not say that it can't be bilateral. I'm not sure that Pakistan is so against multilateral or a facilitator, as you suggest, Dr. Rabia. I think that Pakistan has indicated it would be happy with a third-party mediator. But again, that mediator has to be someone with whom everybody has confidence. This is how it began. I mean, you think how Sir Owen Dixon in 1950, when he traveled through the region, he was effectively a mediator. He was laying the groundwork for the plebiscite to be held. So somebody, as I say, whether it's an individual, whether it's a representative from a country, could possibly be found. I'm afraid I do share a bit of Oasis pessimism at the moment. I'm not sure that anything is going to happen. And I think we've all got to wake up from what our lives are going to be like after we are allowed to release a bit of the lockdown for ourselves personally, I think we are going into a very different world. Someone said there's an end of internationalism, and now we've gone back to tribalism. I'd like to think it's not as depressing as that. And just to answer the President, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to skip over your comment about Keir Starmer, the new Labour leader. I have been watching his pronouncements, and I'm waiting the opportunity. I do have a number of friends in the Labour Party when perhaps I could organise a meeting with him, because I agree with your other comment that, like many people, he hasn't read the literature and he's not aware of what the exact issues are. And so I finish with my final point, which is that everybody, if they want to make a contribution with the Jammu and Kashmir issue, they have to understand fully what that Jammu and Kashmir issue is, because otherwise they'll get nowhere. And that's what really started me on the journey 3 decades ago, was that I wanted to get better than all the propaganda and better than all the information sheets. I wanted really to understand the issue, because I didn't feel I could make any contribution without a full in-depth awareness of what those issues were. Thank you all so much for having me on the panel.
Thank you so much, Victoria. My absolute last question to Dr. Lodhi is that, there are plenty of questions posed to you, and you've gone through most of them. In short, medium, and long term, if we were to ask you to list Pakistan's priority, responses, what should Pakistan do in the short term, one in medium term, one in long term, to deal with the Kashmir issue? What should Pakistan's response in short, medium, and long term be? And I would like you to answer this question, and we'll then wrap up.
I think some of it I've already indicated, but before we wrap up, I also wanted to thank my co-panelists as well as Rabia for organizing it. It turned out to be longer than I had envisaged, but I enjoyed, and I want to thank all the people who participated and the most amazing questions that they posed. I'm sorry we've not been able to address each and every one of them, but I think the fact that these questions were asked shows how much the issue is so alive in people's minds. So I thank everyone for that. I think the next time you have a webinar or a real seminar, not a virtual one, just make sure, even if it's virtual, obviously it would have to be virtual. You have to have a voice from occupied Kashmir. There are people from occupied Kashmir who don't live in occupied Kashmir, who live, for example, Wahid Mirza is a famous author. There are many voices like him and others. I think we need to hear from them. I think you need to also have a representative from the All Parties Hurriyat Conference. They are the people who spearheaded the resistance in occupied Kashmir. So with that humble suggestion, I would say that, near term are what I indicated. I mean, we need to do some things at home. We need to ensure that our policy on Kashmir is firmly based on a national consensus so that everyone is involved in it. And we should avoid gimmickry and focus on policy. And we should ensure that it's sustained. I mean, these are broad principles, but I think it would be hard for me to indicate the exact strategy, because I'm sure people are listening in who may be unfriends of both Pakistan and the people who occupied Kashmir. But I will say that, look, the multilateral environment is going to be very tough. So we need imaginative policy. We need to think out of the box. We need to involve not just professional diplomats, but all those who know the history of occupied Kashmir, who also have some sense of having engaged on occupied Kashmir in the past. We need to bring all our intellectual resources and our diplomatic resources together, and then follow an activist policy on Kashmir using all diplomatic options. All diplomatic and political options should be on the table. Obviously, we should shun any impression that we are considering anything but diplomatic options. This is critical because our adversaries exploit that, they leverage that. So I would not go in that direction at all. There's no need to be scaremongers. I don't think that helps Pakistan. It also betrays a lack of confidence in our strategic capability to defend ourselves. not go down that path, but imaginative out-of-box diplomacy, and certainly get an OSCE ministerial in the near term, get a Human Rights Council meeting in the medium term, because that's not going to be possible very quickly until the pandemic begins to recede, and make sure that you have the tools that you need for a very, very energetic public diplomacy effort, in which you should involve people beyond, let's say, MOFA. I think their work should be supplemented, but others should join in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lodi. With this, we come to the end of our webinar. It is extremely difficult to wrap it up, so I won't even make an attempt. All I would like to say is that on a spectrum of optimism, pessimism, we have found ourselves to be somewhere in the middle. We ought to have hope, because without hope, we cannot have a life. And when we think about Kashmiris and what we can do for them, we need to have hope about us. Great power and solidarity coupled with hardening of positions of the conflicting parties on both ends does not bode well for the future of the Kashmiris, even post-pandemic. And that is a reality with which we probably need to live with for some time in the foreseeable future. I would thank from the bottom of my heart for your valuable time and your valuable inputs, insights on the subject. It was a long session. We could not get to all of the questions, but we did try. And I take all the suggestions on board. And so perhaps next time when we meet on the subject of Kashmir, we will include those voices as well, which Dr. Lodi had mentioned. I'm really indebted to all of you, all my panelists, for joining me here today. Thank you so much, and have a good day. Be safe, stay healthy until next time we meet. Thank you so much.